Thank you, Quindy. That was on me. I still had the mute on, and I was just apologizing for making you a little dizzy because my camera somehow shifted between when I did all my setup checks and when I turned on the button. But to be fair, I haven't had that many technical problems lately, so I guess that's not too bad. I see Bob and Julie and Clavicus. Hello, everyone. I think when I was starting the chat up, I saw that there were like 13 people already, which is more than usual. For the beginning, I mean. Quindy will allow it. Well, thank you, Quindy, who is always there to help us with our technical difficulties and console us when we melt down and whatnot. So, what am I going to be working on today? You're going to be so shocked. You're not going to be shocked. I am still going to be working on this guy. Between one thing and another, I didn't finish him up the way I intended. I feel like maybe we need a little more light. Then if I move it up, it's not blowing out too much, I don't think. But the upside of that is, I'll just move this for a minute. You now get to be the first people ever to verify my claims about how the reverse wet palette keeps paint for a long amount of time. So I've got my two sponges here. The last time I bought sponges, they were like wavy. Normally, I used to get these. I'm not sure if the company changed. And maybe those wavy ones are nice for doing dishes, but they... Oh crap, this camera's moved now too. All right, hold on. I like to keep this nice and level because I know some of us like things to be correct. All right. I'll zoom back out for this. So these are just regular kitchen sponges. Hey, Eric Jackson. That I did check on them. I don't know if I did like every 24 hours, but I would say every 24 to 36 hours to verify that I'm just going to put this sponge down here in case, that they are pretty close to dripping wet. So I loaded these up last night, and I did one Friday. I checked on the paint and added some water. So if you go back and you watch Monday's episode, and I didn't think about the part where I'd have like gross wet sponges, you should be able to verify that this is indeed the same palette by all of these oopsie marks. So I will need to check the paint again, which I'm going to do now while you watch, and just make sure that the consistency is what I want. And it seems counterintuitive, but I have found I can preserve the consistency of paint more easily with this palette than with a wet palette. So sometimes I can use paint on a wet palette the next day, but mostly I just use a wet palette to keep my paint nice during a painting session. I don't expect it to preserve paint. But I don't do this trick all the time, but I do regularly do this. I mostly use it for if I'm painting a figure to a very high standard. It's got like a large cloak or something that's, like a large area where it's going to take me more than one painting session to paint it. And then also if it's something where there's a chance I might goof up that part later, I'll preserve the paint so that it's easier to fix. So these were paints that were drying up during last session, and while they are too yucky to use, the sponge method kind of locked them in place where they were at the end of last Monday. So I will not be using those. I just wanted to show that they are in fact still somewhat liquid. And if those pools had been fuller and I'd added just a little bit of water, I was only using those colors last week to touch up a few areas. They weren't really a main part of the painting, so I didn't add enough water. I didn't add enough paint. Because part of the trick of what makes this work is this particular palette has very small holes, and if you can't find this, so if you're looking for this, search for 28 well palette on Amazon. This is the same one Anne uses if you watch her show mornings on the Reaper channel here. Cheap Joe's has them. They were the first place to have them, actually. But if you can't find that, or you don't, it's more expensive than you want to try for doing this, look for something called spotting plates that they use in science. I don't know which one. They use in science to do, I guess you put things in there and test reactions or something. And they're very similar. They may even be shallower pools. So I'm going to go in. These were my shadow colors, so they were thinned down a little more. And I might have to start painting before I know if all the paint's exactly the consistency I want. But there's definitely been separation. I think you can see the difference between that one that I just stirred and the others that have some water and or medium floating on top. Which is why it is a good idea if you want to do this too every few days. Go in and check on the paints. It'll sometimes be like the ones near the edges dry a little more. Or the ones with white. So these paints are probably pretty close to the consistency that they should be. But I bet when we start getting up here to these light colors that I will be adding more water. And then this last one was mostly for like doing lining, so I don't want it too thin. I want it to be nice and dark, but fluid enough to flow well. It might need a little water, but we'll try it first. So do I have any like interesting things to talk about? I don't know. I did so normally there's a section in our town, and I moved here 20 years ago. And when I moved here, it was just a hospital and a Walmart. And I think they had plans for what it's become since then when I moved there, but it just took a while to implement all the plans. But now it's like this like huge, it's just this long street of shopping. Hey, Kirst. And I like to not go there after about November 15th because there's just one way in and one way out. The side streets don't go anywhere. They just go to like housing developments and stuff like that. Someone asked me to work there one Christmas at the game store, and I'm like, I don't think that's going to be happening. I don't have the patience to do. And it's the game store was in the mall with the worst parking too. But anyway, I had to go get something at a store that used to be somewhere less annoying and moved to the annoying district because all the shopping is there, the people are there. And we went, and it wasn't like too bad. Interesting that the roads weren't that bad, but the store that I went in, the line was like enormous, and that took a while. And then we went to the office supply store, which I was guessing would not be like a top Christmas shopping destination. And I think we were correct. So yes, if anyone's coming in a little bit later, like Kirst, this is the same paint that I was using last week. I kept wet sponges over it. And to me, this works better as a paint preservation method than a wet palette would, because I can control the consistency. Since the sponge is from the top, it's really just preventing evaporation. There's no way, unless I make the sponges too wet, that it is adding moisture to the paints, which I think happens in a wet palette. Sometimes from kind of a terrarium effect, where I think the paint evaporates up onto the lid and then comes down in like a mini rain type of situation. The water from your sponge, and it gets in the paint. But I think that even with parchment paper or whatever membranes, whatever we're calling them now, that some water seeps in from the sponge below. Certainly with if you have the old school Masterson Stay Wet palette, that sponge the paper that they have for that, absolutely there is a flow of water in both directions. I think it may work well for painting on paper or canvas type acrylics where you're working at a larger scale and you're probably not working with your paint. You're not being as fiddly about the consistency as we can be. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to add more in these ones that have a lot of white in this last row. So I'll move over just a little. So I tried their official paper a few times, and you have to like do all this stuff. You have to like soak it in hot water or cold water, or some whole thing. I mean, the nice part about it is it's thicker, so you can reuse it. You can like kind of just rinse it off. But I did not care for it at any rate. And I only know a few miniature painters who do. The vast majority of us just use parchment paper, baking paper. It depends on where in the world you're from, what you call it. But even that, because I've been testing this other paint, an artist's, it's student grade, but it's an art paint company, to see if it would work for miniature painting, because it has some single pigment paints, and I know that's kind of hot for some people in the miniature world. And I tried it on the wet palette, and it made it separate, and I think it watered it down, and it already has a problem with being too transparent. Because I tried it again last night, I think, on just a foam plate, and it worked much better. Still in the context of not being amazing, but much better. You know what? That's still a little thick. That's just linen white, so if I have to redo that one, that's not too hard. And I think that's just the Goggler green. And that's just blue liner. Everything else here is like a weird mix of various greens and pinks and a little bit of purples. Because when I started painting this guy, we were doing the pink. So I'm just getting this out of the frame because of how the camera will go kerflooey if it has to focus on two things. Finds that very challenging. So I was working on this guy. I painted the head part, I think the light. I painted the brain part, head, we're going to call it brain, last February, and then I wanted to work on the legs, which is what I've been doing for a couple weeks now. Sorry, I totally took my medicine. I've been having a lot of problems lately. So I'm also going to suck on a cough drop. My apologies to anyone. I will try not to make noises. Since you're here for painting videos, not ASMR videos. I do not have the voice for ASMR. Alright. So because of all the pink here, when I did the green, it seemed weird, but when I added some purple and pink to the tentacles, I liked it better. And I'm actually thinking now I might have to go the other way and add some green into like the base of the brain area to integrate things. Make them seem like they're all under the same lighting. All right, so this I was mostly done. This tentacle isn't done. I was kind of doing them in the sequence that they attach. So this one is done. And then this one that you see on the other side is not done. Let's see if I can zoom in a little more. Okay, maybe that was too much. That's a lot of brain right in your face, isn't it? Okay. So part of what makes this interesting is there's a color transition to shade and highlight as well, not just one single color, and I'm also taking that opportunity to add some textures to kind of go with the sculpted textures. So it's kind of a dot dash sort of stroke. Although I probably should have started with the shading. So let's backtrack. And just rinse the brush and feather out the edges. But it needs to be darker. If you have been here for previous sessions working on this guy, you've heard me talk about making cylinder type shapes like these tentacles look more three-dimensional by having it get darker as it moves away from the viewer and lighter where it's bulging out towards the viewer. And while these are tentacles, This is also true of arms and legs, which are cylinders. Her said it's looking disgustingly gribbly, which I'm very happy about. I don't normally paint gribbly. Michael Proctor likes them, and I'm happy that I don't get asked to paint them very often, but it's kind of fun to do something different and push yourself. So I take that as a compliment because I'm not very practiced at making things look gribbly. Are you in focus? I didn't get enough shading down here. And now I may have too much, but I can come back with the original green and kind of mess with that a little bit. But put my lining in while I'm here. Because I also want to make sure that there is some, at least a little bit of separation and definition between each of the tentacles. They are each their own unique tentacle, after all. So right now, I'm just going to address the overall shape, and then I'll come back in and bring out some of these little sculpted thingies. You would think at some point I would have gone to look up the anatomy of tentacles and know the words, but apparently that's not going to happen. Once again, I'm jumping to the highlighting when I prefer to do the shading first. So why do I prefer to do the shading first? And I don't like 100% always do it this way, but it tends to be my preference. And there are two reasons. One is that the shading, as we're seeing now, tends to be in more recessed, difficult to reach with the brush locations. So if I do it first and I mess anything up, I can fix it with my midtones and then go on to the highlights. And chances are it's going to be easier that way. But the other reason is, and this is where things get personal and you may have to experiment with what you like, I find it easier to, I don't know, to think about the whole volume thing with the shading. Like the shading is probably more important to creating the sense of volume, making things look more 3D. The highlighting is kind of for the pop factor. And I just can visualize where things should be better if I start with the shading. As a rule. I mean, over time I've gotten a little better at doing it either or. But certainly in the beginning, I found that. And I did find working up from black, which I know a lot of people like to do, or the darkest shadow color, more difficult. I'm better at that now, and I do think that it is a faster way to paint. Absolutely. So I will tend to go in that direction if I'm painting a figure that I need to get done more quickly, or that, you know, it doesn't, the quick painting is more important than amazing looking painting, I guess maybe is how I would put that. Although the other way that can work to be more quick is start in the middle, like I've done here, put the highlights on everything, and then come back and put the shadows on everything. And the reason that is quicker is because you can use the same colors to shade an awful lot of things. So this purple that I'm using, if this were like a person, I could probably use the same color on the skin. The darker colors would work fine on blue, on red, possibly even green. I mean, like nicer kinds of green that I don't want to look gribbly. So I think that's why. Um, I think that's why that's quicker. But and that I learned from uh, James Wappel, who I think does not even paint that way anymore. I don't know. He paints so much with oils now, and that's a whole different process. But and I guess this is one of those knowing yourself and knowing what you like about painting and why you're doing this examples. It just wasn't satisfying to me because I said before what I enjoy a lot about painting are those moments of transformation, and there was like a lot of delayed gratification on that front with that approach. So things really didn't start to look good until you got to the shadow part. But I had to like paint a whole miniature to get to the shadow part, so I wasn't getting little hits of the parts I like most. So for me, I was okay with slowing down a bit to make it a little more fun. But that's always going to depend on why you're painting and what you're painting for, whether that approach makes sense. But I think it is important to know what you enjoy about the process, because if the only thing you enjoy is, oh, I've got this great looking miniature at the end, and that when I plop that down on the table, my players are going to freak. Or, I'm going to take this to the game store and I'm going to have like the best painted army and it's going to be awesome. Like there is a lot of time in between I'm going to paint this and it actually looking good. Like there's a lot of time between those things. You got to enjoy something about the time in between that I have the idea that I want to paint this and I actually finish painting this. To keep with it, I think. I think if you don't find that kind of stuff, then video games or books or whatever other things you like to do to relax are always going to seem more compelling than sitting down and painting your miniatures. Because there are parts of that you know what you enjoy. But it is like you kind of have to think about it. Like it may not be obvious what you, like obvious to you, I mean, what you enjoy. Like I feel like what is helpful to do is actually, have some painting sessions, sit down and paint. And then when you're finished, think about which parts you really enjoyed the most, like where you were feeling the most satisfied or engaged or interested. And whatever that is, make sure to regularly include that in your painting. So if the part you really like is construction and kit bashing and all of that, and you're actually not that much into the painting, like don't assemble and kit bash and customize your whole army and then sit down and all you're going to be doing is painting for a long time. Like you will probably not last through that. You'll get bored and be like, oh, I'll just start making my next army. Or if you really like painting human skin, which is something I do enjoy, and you have, like, you just end up in a cycle of that's not what you're painting right now, because in your game the people are off in the wilderness and they're meeting only monsters and stuff like that. Like if you're starting to not paint because you're not getting to do the parts you like, just sit down and paint a human. Maybe you're not going to use it in this game, but you'll use it eventually. So that is something that I didn't even figure out with miniatures. I figured out too late. Not too late, but later than I should have. I figured that out when I started studying traditional art, that it had to not just be about the end thing for me. I had to figure out, because sometimes the end thing is going to suck or it's going to take forever. So I had to figure out what I liked about the journey, so that even if it sucked, I could be like, well, I got to do this thing that I like. I got to, sit here and chill out, play with color, get in the zone. So it's worth it, even if this particular picture is quite craptastic. I'm putting enough of this pink in. Back with my pinker mix. It's a little orangey too. I'm not worrying too much about doing this textury thing down here in the shadows. If I were painting this as a contest entry or something that would get a lot of close-up photography, I would worry about it. But we don't see as much texture in areas that are heavily shadowed or areas that are, like if it's close to the light, it gets kind of blown out, you know, like overexposed, and you don't see as much texture there. So that means I can kind of just ignore it here. In the shadow areas. Those are not shadow areas, is why I'm not ignoring it right there. And this is like a very prominent tentacle. So even if I was like, oh, that one can suck, because no one's going to look in there, you want to try to make the things that are really, you know, this is literally poking out at the viewer. So it is a good place to spend extra attention. All right, call that good. Come back up here because this should be dry now and put a little more 3D-ness on the bumps and bubbles and pustules and whatever this guy is going on. In those, I do want to hit the ones in the shadows a little bit because they're kind of poking out. It's 3D texture, it's not fine enough to be 2D texture, so that would be like a finer type texture. So it does show a little bit. And maybe just a little bit of highlights on some of those. Let's do that peachy one. And that's done, but I got my suckers here. So I eventually just gave up and started painting the suckers with some of my pinker mixes. Because I spent too long overthinking what color the sucker pod should be. I give them a little more shading than the other areas to help it be more visually obvious, which is the back and which is the front. I was trying to lighten up my shading, which is one of the challenging things of painting something like this that has this kind of color transition. So your color transition isn't just the shadows and the highlights, there's a color transition, and then all of that needs shadows and highlights. Is sometimes finding the right values. So like I knew I had to go lighter here, and I went too light. Then I may have done the opposite, but that's why I have all my paints mixed up, because I can fix it. Just a little bit of that darker green. I want them to stick out, but in a naturally sticking out kind of way. They're still part of the same critter. Well, even the same part of the same critter. Just the same critter. decide which mix to do now that I'm moving lighter. Go with my peachy one. But we will have to go lighter still. And some of these, you know, you get transitions that aren't amazing. I can just come back with the middle color and kind of smoosh it together. Guess that's sort of what blending is, smooshing things together. Looks like I went a little darker on that one. Pinker maybe. Bring a little of that in. But it is in a different orientation, so somewhat different lighting. And I mean, a lot of things are not as uniformly colored as we sometimes think that they are. So I'm not too concerned about that. I can also just go back to the ones that I originally painted differently and add some of these colors and unify it that way. There, you never knew that I had originally made a different life choice. Alright, so that's that tentacle. So I think that means, well, first it means I need more texture here. But then it means that I'm on this tentacle. Hold on, there's some kind of cat situation. Is he bugging you out? You want to come say hi? You want to come say hi, Al? Come here. Nope. Okay. Corbin's being too much of an annoying baby brother for her to pay attention to me. He has really been working that angle a lot lately. And then he'll come and try and be super nice to her, but she had a poor example of cat friendship growing up, so she's not great at it. I keep hoping that one day she'll figure out that he's super warm, because she's always cold in the winter. And she'll be like, oh, you can be my best friend. But alas, thus far it has not happened. And since this part is perpendicular if you're looking at him straight on, which I guess you guys are, and I'm not now. So it would not be as, there wouldn't be as much light reaching it as here. So it wouldn't be like totally dark where this part's gonna start moving under, and it should be darker. But I want the perpendicular part to have like some darkness. I mean, I guess that's the tricky thing about shapes and volumes and whatever the cool kids are calling it these days. You know, it's not just the fact that this is a cylinder. It's a cylinder that is making this shape. And then I have also done a color transition. So what seems like a relatively simple exercise, and this is one of the reasons we shouldn't beat up on ourselves too much, that there's a lot of moving parts sometimes to what we're trying to do. And it's good to strive to improve and everything, but it's also good to realize that, you know, you're not going to get it every time, and that's okay, because there's a lot going on. we are actually harder on ourselves, I think, sometimes than people doing traditional art that breaks things up into different, kind of like you're dealing with value, then you're dealing with color. Like you're not trying to, every time I sit down to paint, I'm going to make an amazing picture. Like that's the not how most people are doing it when they're doing traditional art. But that's sort of what we expect out of ourselves with miniatures. It's like, well, whenever I paint, I'm working on a miniature and I should end up with an awesome finished miniature. It's like, well, chances are good that is not going to be how it works out every time. And if you accept that as part of the process, I think that you will be happier than having this expectation that you are supposed to be like this world famous, amazing juggler straight out the gate and every single time. Cabbage tentacle. Wow. This one. The hardest part for a non-spatially inclined person here. And I think I might need a brush with a little bit of a hook. Where is my brush with a little bit of a hook? So even if you are a Kalinsky sable snob like myself, there is absolutely a place for the brush with the little hook, and that's one of them. It's, you know, it's going to be able to get around, you know, that surface in a way that I cannot otherwise do. I don't think I have a cloak to show you how well it works on the hems of cloaks. I mean, like a figure of a cloak. Obviously, I don't have a cloak. I'm more of a jeans and t-shirt kind of person. I don't think I could pull off a cloak. But it's certainly more likely to persuade me to try fashion than a lot of other things. I'm going to go real dark down here. Mostly so that no one wants to look at it. Because that is not going to be the most amazing part of this miniature. And wait, I think he's got a little bit of a, so it hangs down a little bit lower than the inside, but you would want to make sure you get a lot of dark paint in there so that, you know, you don't see the gray of the plastic or the white or whatever. And this is where the hooky brush can come in handy. So I gotta orient it so the hook is going to the inside, and then I can get that fairly easily painted. Can I make it easy to see? Maybe not, because of how 4 scale is constructed, but hopefully that gave the idea of ways to use the hooky brush. And I'm seeing that I did not put enough shading on this other leg for where it's twisting all around and doing stuff. Let's go even darker. So I've got that little, I don't know if this happens to you, I get this little bubble of water on the ferrule of my brush all the time, and often I will not notice, and then it will go into the paint, either the paint on the palette or the paint on the figure, and it is non-optimal, but it is what it is, and then I have to deal with it. So I try to train myself to be better about making sure that I've, wiped that part off, but it hasn't really taken. I do tend to be, force myself to take the time to be more careful about it when I'm doing something I really don't want to have to fix or make harder, like freehand or something like that. Where's my next pinker? Do the peachy one maybe. The pink I ended up with is a little light in value for some of these areas, I think. Alright, so I didn't actually do all the texturing on the other side, but I thought I would take care of the hard to reach side first. So I don't know if any of you have tips on, ways to make sure that you find painting more enjoyable and less stressful and keep yourself coming to the table. But I'm sure that other people, including myself, would be interested to hear that. Because I know it is a challenge for a lot of us. It's easy to get discouraged, it's easy to get distracted. I mean, problems like, overtime and Christmas, and that's a different issue for not coming to the table. But the kind of problems we have when we have the option and we're not taking the option. I think another thing that I found helpful was there are certain parts of painting that require like a lot of my brain, like almost all of it is doing something and interested in what's happening, like choosing colors, mixing up the colors, even making things where I have to like make decisions and stuff like that. But then there are other parts, and this would be an example of one. Like, I know I have all my colors, I know what my process is. It's just sitting there doing it over and over on. He does have 8 tentacles, on 8 tentacles. And then there will be another part of my brain that is kind of like, well, this is boring, and I want to go do something else. And have you noticed that your back hurts, and that kind of thing. And what I found was great for that was like, I like audiobooks a lot. I'll put on TV shows sometimes, or movies or something, but it has to be something that either I've already seen or where the visual component is fairly minimal. Because, I do need to be looking at my miniature most of the time. And there are shows that fit that bill, and then there are shows that are definitely, it's like, no, this is one I actually want to watch what's happening. And it's not going to be a great choice for painting. And that made a big difference when I figured that out. Because, I take it for granted now. I've got the phone and the iPad and all that kind of stuff. But when I first started painting, we didn't have a lot of that. Like, eventually I got an iPod, and then a Bluetooth speaker. But it was not the wealth of entertainment options that I have today. And it also was not as nice for reference. Like, I couldn't just Google something and have a picture of it on a good screen that was near my painting area. I would Google something and print it out on a piece of paper, and it wouldn't look nearly, the color wouldn't be as rich and the details wouldn't be as apparent, even if it was a good quality photo. Because I would generally not do this on photo paper. Maybe that would have helped. I would just do it on printer paper. And it was still useful to have reference. Some reference is better than no reference, in my opinion. But the difference between being able to look at a high quality screen image and zoom in and go, okay, well, I can't see the whatever angle on this picture. I'm going to go look for one where it's got the tail of this animal. That has made a huge difference in making things easier and more fun as well. But yeah, there are absolutely is, and if the other time I don't want entertainment is if I'm trying something new. Because part of the struggle of trying something new is just making sure you don't just default to usual mode, and that it's really easy to go on autopilot if you put on a book or a show or a Twitch stream or whatever, and you start painting, and half your brain is doing that. I gotta cover a boo-boo here. And it's very easy to then not be thinking, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this feathering thing or wet blending or trying this type of brush stroke or something. You just really easy to just go back to doing what you always do. And then you'll get frustrated with yourself because you did not learn the new technique. But sometimes it's because you just have to accept that it's like, no, I'm going to have to use my whole brain to work on this, because half of what my brain is going to be doing is fighting against me not doing what I normally do. Or your eyeballs not telling you that something looks wrong, because they will tell you something looks wrong just because it doesn't look like what you normally do. I think that's one of the problems people have with pushing their contrast. Is you may, come and look at something I've done or something Michael Proctor's done or whatever and go, oh, I like all that contrast. But when it comes to sitting and painting, you're used to seeing your miniatures look the way they look when you're painting them. So if you try to do something different, there's going to be part of your mind saying, oh, you must be doing this wrong. It doesn't look the same as it usually looks. It doesn't look like what I would expect. And you have to fight that part and remind it that it's not supposed to look like what you usually do because you are trying something new. My paints are just, since the sponges aren't on top, they are evaporating much more swiftly. So I'm just giving a check to the ones, it is mostly the ones that have white or light colors that have white in it. There are pigments have different drying rates, and I don't know that white actually is like in oil painting, if that's considered. I don't think it's considered a fast drying color, because when one of the oil painting workshops I did, we were supposed to go get an alkyd white or something that was specifically formulated to dry more quickly. But for whatever reason, for acrylics, I find that the white stuff evaporates way more quickly. Maybe someone out there knows some science on that, but I do not. But yeah, been having a few conversations lately with people about how we don't think about how pigments are, they're idiosyncratic little beasties. They're not uniform, even though a lot of them are synthetically made now. I mean, so yellow ochre and burnt sienna and all that kind of stuff, they were really rocks originally. Like, that's why they're named those things. And they're not most of the time now. It's it's synthetically produced iron oxide. But they still, those like phthalo blue, quinacridone, you can tell from the names that those were not things that we grabbed out of nature, because we made up those names later. But they each have their little quirks. How shiny they are, how long they take to dry, how powerful they are in a mix. Like my old buddy Phthalo Blue just barges in and takes over everything. So it's like, if you want to mix green, you start with a big pool of yellow and you add just a little tiny bit of blue until you know that you need more blue. So that's tinting strength. So it was finish. So some of them are shinier and some of them are more matte. Tinting strength, dry time. There's a couple other things that we think it's all about the binder, you know, like what the acrylic binder is like, or whether there's enough pigment. Oh yeah, transparency and opacity. That's a big one that pigments influence, because some are by nature transparent and some are not. And we just sit there and say, oh, whoever made this paint didn't put enough pigment in it, and this paint sucks, and they're cheaping out. And it's like, well, that pigment, you know, yellow is yellow. It's almost all of the yellows are transparent. Cadmium yellow is less transparent, but it's also A, super expensive, and B, not something you can put in a paint that you're going to put non-toxic on. It's not like, I mean, cadmium's not going to kill you, especially if you're not dumb and you aren't eating the paint. But I mean, some of us do lick our brushes, which is essentially eating the paint, and you want to not do that with cadmium. I wouldn't use it as skin cream either. But unless you're doing stuff like that, it's not that dangerous to the user. It's more of a problem for the people who make the paint, and because, you know, pigments start out as particulates, and the ones that are toxic require more protection and handling, whatnot, before it gets put into the paint and binder. And I still didn't put enough water in that creamy color, because when I'm doing the textures, I don't want to thin the paint down too much. If it's too thin, the way you would try to do if you're doing glazing or you're trying to make transitions where you can't see the transition, then you're not seeing anything, and that's not what you want for painting textures that you can see at least a little bit. But I also don't want them to look too stark and painted on, which I think on screen some areas do look, at least on mine. My preview screen, some areas do look a little, I was noticing it on that one. It looks a little starker on screen than it does in person. I mean, it is a little stark, and that was something I was like, if I end up carrying, I can fix it later with a glaze or something, or what I'm doing right now. But that's just one of those weird things with the camera. Like the other day when we were looking at the drawing shift, and that's more property. Well, see, I think that's pigments a little bit too, although it has to do with binder as well. Because so acrylic's a little more prone to it, especially our matte acrylics, I think, because the matting agent makes the paint look a little whiter when it's wet. And I think in general, acrylic binder it's a little cloudy, so it looks whiter when the paint is wet, and then things get a little darker when they dry. But there's a pigment influence too. Alright, so that was that one. But I haven't done the bibbles. Hold on. Oh no, I'm very confused. Alright, that one was from last week, but apparently I didn't do the bibble. I think I did the suckers, but not the bumps. So yeah, anyone who makes any paint line that's remotely consistent, my hat is off to them, because the pigment does not want to help with that process. So that is that tentacle, but I was working on, it was a big curling one, wasn't it? I'm losing my mind. That one. All right, so now I'm going to do the little warts and whatnot on this one. A brain only a mother could love, I guess. So you all are very quiet today. seen any suggestions about how to get our butts in the chair. The perpetual challenge. I mean, not questions, comments. Any comments about that? Although, if you have questions on something, feel free to ask. Alright, felt like another paint was... Yeah, that one is thickening up. That one's fine. Okay. So that's that tentacle. Looks like I did part of this wiggly one, but not that part. Weird, but okay. I guess I just have to do the top of this one. And put some lining in between these two. So that we can distinguish one from the other. I might have wiped out part of the line. That one. Perhaps I have not done this one previously because it is weird and hard to reach. I had a lot of fun planing the Hydra and trying to remember which head I was on. I think eventually I had to have some kind of system. Is that looking dark enough? I'm not sure that it is. Might have to grab some full strength glue liner. Which I treat as my darkest dark. So I use blue liner in the shadows of black. Blue is cool, so it appears to recede from the viewer, and most people will perceive a super dark blue like that as possibly darker than black. Plus, it's more interesting than black. I like to use a lot of just plain black pigment in my things. I'll have to see if there are other places that I should make even darker, because you can see how it kind of emphasizes that curve and whatnot. Like maybe... Nah, I think natural light's going to hit that part enough. I rarely rely on natural light, but this is a bigger than I normally paint figure. And we'll get Sir 4 scale in case anyone hasn't seen him previously, and I think that Quindy found the name of this guy last week. Will I remember? Elder something. If I'm right, I at least got one word now out of 2 that I remember. Elder. Wouldn't just be Elder Thing. Ron's way more creative than that. No Elder. Okay, then I totally don't remember any of the words of what this guy is called. Because I just call him Brain Monster in my head. So, Hive Warden. There we go. You're right. There was nothing about Elder. I don't know why I thought. I was making him old before his time. Now I feel bad. Sorry. Sorry, little dude. You're plenty young. You've got years of tormenting people in dungeons ahead of you. I'm used to things not even having a name when I paint them, I think is part of what the problem is. Because often when I'm asked to paint something, it hasn't even come out yet. So I just call it whatever I want in my own head. And then have trouble remembering its name forevermore. That is not my excuse for this guy, of course, because I did not paint him before he came out. I mean, it's not like I'm great with names of people either, to be honest. So please don't ever take it amiss if I seem like I don't remember your name and you feel like I should because I've met you before. There are a lot of things I don't remember that I should remember. It's especially hard with online people or people that you also know online. I'm not insinuating that you all only exist online. I have met some of you, and I know that you do, in fact, exist in three-dimensional space. But then, they've got their real name. You might have a name here, and they might have a different name on, like, the forums or Discord or something, and that's just way more names than my sad little brain is going to remember and cross-reference. That is why I love that when we have conventions, like ReaperCon, we put name tags on. And sometimes people are nice and even write their online persona name on their name tag. And make it a little easier for the rest of us. Alright, I got distracted by that one. I don't know why. Because I finished up that one. Then I see where I made boo-boos on this one. So we just fix the boo-boos a little bit. So I'm just finding the closest value paint. And it may be because of a mold line as much as a boo-boo. Going over it. Now I'm just going to pretend that it's wordy spot things. And lean into it. Sometimes leaning into it is a workable answer when you have a surface defect in your cast. Alright, I think I'm down to the most prominent tentacle because he's telling all his minions to get to work. Because he's the Hive Warden, so clearly he's in charge of something. Something or somebody. Or some things. Or somebodies, I guess. So he's got to get them to do their jobs. So terrorizing the people. This is the only one I think where the actual bottom is facing straight up at all. So I don't want to make it too dark, but I do want to change the shades since I've been putting more of the like pinks and purples on the underside. But I'm not going to do the suckers until I finish the main body of the tentacle. And perhaps the shading that I have not addressed yet. Sorry that Ella didn't want to come and say hello. She's very glued to the heat vent at this time of year. We've always called her Sad Southern Kitty because her reaction is a little extreme to the temperature. And that's not even about getting old. She always did that. It's just like, if it's colder than like 65 degrees, she's a little concerned that we're all going to die. But then every now and then she'll still go out on the screened-in porch. It's like, okay, I thought you thought it was super cold, but here you are. Because sometimes things are too interesting. So that looks rough, and that's okay, because I can just wet the brush and go along the edges. And feather it out. And then if that doesn't work, I can come back with my original color and kind of blur it in a little bit. Monsters are a great canvas to try to practice that kind of thing on, because if you mess up wet blending or feathering or what else are they, loaded brush, what else are the kids doing these days, which are all techniques that depend a little bit on speed. It's probably a surface where it's not like a princess or an elf or something where they should have wonderful skincare regimes and look very, flawless and beautiful and whatnot. They can look a little messed up, and sometimes it just looks better. And then this texture kind of thing. So there was a rough transition there, but the texture can work as well as my normal blending techniques to fix some of that stuff. I think, is there another? I thought there was another. I think that's more of a goof than a rough transition, but let's just try and see if I can fix it with just like more a textury thing and not trying to do standard blending stuff. Okay, honestly, that little stroke is kind of how I fix blending things these days. But just in a way where you're supposed to not see the texture. All right, back to the top of the tentacle. This way. This is one of those situations where I'm not doing the ideal thing, which is keeping your brush hand in the same position as much as possible. But I don't want to be too dizzying. And now I'm moving the miniature around. I know I'm very bad for that, probably, compared to a lot of people that you watch on stream. I move that guy all over the place. It's just so ingrained in me to do that so as not to move my painting hand and build up the muscle memory. There is a mold line that's kind of messing with me. But that's okay. I said monsters, we just make them uglier and it's all cool. So I'm going to go with that philosophy. And then try to figure out where to hold them to do this part. Because I also have to stay mindful of, this is perpendicular. No, This is horizontal and this is vertical, and there's an in between. So I have to have a little, maintain where the light and dark are doing different things, as well as be adding the colors and the textures and whatnot. So I'm actually texturing with darker paint down here. And then I'll go back and pull it back a little with the lighter paint. Like I said, there's a lot of balls in the air and a lot of moving parts. I've typically tried to do things that were a little more straightforward, I guess, on this show. Since beyond the kit, the kit is a learning tool for people who are fairly new to painting miniatures. But I know that not all of you who are watching are those people. So I like to try to mix something in for various levels and interests and whatnot. I know I'm moving him again. This part is... Sometimes it's more about the seeing than the brush part. Just figuring out how to hold things so I can see them can be tricksy. And I do the finger erase, clearly. I genuinely do that fairly often. I mean, I try not to handle my miniature too much with my bare hands, but I also make it a point to wash my hands before I sit down to paint, so that I will have minimal skin oils. And in winter, maximal dry skin. I always wash my hands a lot at conventions, not just because of the germ factor, but because I know I will be handling other people's miniatures, and I want to make sure that I don't get grease or whatever on them. I don't know what's happening with that little stripe. It's like the mold line is here, so why is there a stripe up here? I will get problems like that sometimes with blending, where there's just this little, like you might not even be able to see it, like a little divot in the surface. And if it's just at the wrong point where a blend needs to transition, it can make things look rough. And you sometimes have to come in with paint that's lighter than really should be there, or darker than what's really should be there, to just in that one little spot, to counteract whatever's happening with the surface. And as much as I love metal miniatures, I do think that overall, apart from like the mold line parts, that kind of thing happens a lot less with plastic and resin miniatures. The surface tends to be more uniformly flat. If it's supposed to be, obviously the surface I'm painting right now is not supposed to be uniformly flat. He's got a lot of warp problems right here. It's extra textury. Probably because the sculptor was making the same calculation I was, and that this is definitely a area of focus that deserves maximal interest and attention. I don't know if Bob and Julie have any comments along those lines of how they make decisions of where to put details or not put details. Or I know they think a lot about the poses, and the composition, and all that kind of stuff. Combining that with the doing things the way that the miniature making process needs it done is an extra added challenge. I mean, when I said we painters had a few balls in there, I don't think it's as many things as the sculptors have to consider. A few more warts detailed. And then, well, I think I just made my own wart there. Then work on the sucker pods. I got some shading. Just a little bit more shading. There. And I'll do these. Oh, look at that. See, even after all this time, there's like a big part that I never painted at all. Oopsies. So, give that a minute to dry before I come back and put more shading there. Julie didn't hear or Bob, I assume it's Julie who's at the keyboard. I was just talking about how this tentacle looks like it has more of the texture detailing, and I was also giving it more attention from a paint point of view, because that one is like kind of sort of the most important tentacle, I guess, if I were to pick one of the 8, because it's like he's pointing, it's moving away from the body, and that I assume, just as I was talking about how I'm going to put more effort in painting parts that are more important or more interesting to the viewer, that you all have to make that same kind of consideration, but then also balance that with the very many needs that, undercuts and the other constraints that you have from the manufacturing process, as well as your own desires about composition and so on. So that you have a tougher job. And you're doing it all in 3D. I mean, we're painting in 3D, I guess, but not exactly the same way. We already have this very nice roadmap of someone else thinking in 3D for us. So we can even just set up a lamp and take a reference picture. And I have certainly done that. If I really want to pay attention to where I'm painting the light, that is very much a thing that I like to do. I know when I first started painting, I kind of painted everything the same, like would have painted every single tentacle exactly the same, and you kind of go for this uniformity where you take everything down to the same shadow level or wash level, and you take everything up to the same highlighting level, and the same, if you're doing like a pattern, it's as defined over the entire area of the dress or whatever. And as time has gone on, I've realized that that's not really what you want to do. You want to pick areas that are more important for the viewer to look at, and other areas that are less important or become sort of places where they can rest their eye. instead of, throwing this whole big mishmash of stuff at them. And it's like, you figure it out. My job as the painter is to try to figure some of that stuff out. Now, I'm fairly terrible at that, but I have at least come to understand that this is my function, even if I don't get it right. Julie is saying, yes, all that, and sometimes things can change when cleaning the casting. Sometimes we're not paying attention. I know when I've done prep, every now and then I have taken something off that I assumed was a mold line or a flaw in the cast, and then later been like, oh, oopsie, that was really supposed to be there. The one where I really remember doing it was a dark sword miniature where she had sculpted stockings, and the top of the stockings was very obvious. There was like a band that's holding them onto her thigh, but around the ankles there were wrinkles, and those wrinkles are actually a very important part of conveying the idea that there is, some kind of material over the bare skin. But I had taken them off the one ankle before I clued into that, so I had to paint them in on the one side so that it matched the side where I did not screw up. And that would not be the only time I've done something like that. I think there was another time when I texted Ron, there was all this stuff. This was just when 3D prints were starting to become a thing. I think it was like one of the first 3D prints that I had been sent to paint. And so I took these pictures and circled things and texted Ron, and I'm like, okay, is this supposed to be here or is this not supposed to be here? I don't want to take it off until I know. That's like, I don't think it should be there, but I just want to double check with somebody who knows what this is actually supposed to look like. And it was supposed to come off. And then sometimes I ask that question, and they do discover that there's been a flaw in the mold making, and they need to go make a new mold. I don't think that's happened with the Reaper miniature, but that has happened a couple times where I'm like, this seems weird, what's going on here? And they're like, yeah, it's not supposed to look like that. Where are the flowers? And I'm like, there are no flowers on mine. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, okay, well, I guess that got wiped out in the, when someone was cleaning the master or something happened with the mold. I think the one that I was kind of surprised had made it to me before anyone noticed. It was like there was trim around this piece of clothing. So there was this like sculpted in decorative trim kind of thing. And it was only half there. Like it went down the right side and to the middle. And then it wasn't on the left side and down the middle of the left side. It was like the sculptor went to lunch and then came back and forgot to finish that other side. And a lot of eyeballs had been on this. And I, texted the person. I'm like, I feel like this is not correct. And I'd actually done a bit of painting on it already. It ended up that, when I did the painting again, it was better. So it wasn't like a totally bad thing. But they were like, yeah, stop painting. I'm going to send you a correct one. So that's the downside of being the first person to paint things. Because I know that a lot of you, and I do this too, if something already exists. You go look at what other people have painted, and you're like, oh, they painted that as like a belt pouch, so I guess it's a belt pouch or whatever. You're not sure what something is, or you're like, oh, is that leather? Is it this? And you look at what some other people have done, and it gives you some ideas. But when you paint the first one off the presses, you get to figure that stuff out sometimes. Which we bought a couch years ago. When we first got married, we bought this entire living room set, and it was denim, which was super fun to have. Eventually, it got kind of too much old faded jeans thing going on. But we very much loved having it while we had it. But it was like the first one they finished making, other than the one that was like on the furniture showroom floor or whatever. And so it had all these like weird little problems. Like there were these tacks or pins or something that were left in. and it ended up ripping one of the cushions. So they, I mean, they made it all right, but it was just funny. Like being an early adopter is sometimes not the best. I feel like that tentacle isn't green enough. But I also feel like maybe I don't need to care. That was another one of those learning to be an adult moments. Because we measured the room and everything. Like everything fit in the room. But this was some seriously oversized, puffy, huge furniture. And the fact that it technically fit in the space didn't mean that it was the appropriate size for the space. So first we got rid of like the ottoman, then we got rid of the love seat, because then just there was a matching chair, and the chair was like the size that a love seat normally would be. And eventually we're just down to the couch before we're like, well, I think this has gotten a little long in the tooth. Julie says we have to have notes or we may forget to come back to finish an area. Lots of little details on these things. Yeah, I can imagine. And for myself, when I'm painting something important, I like to take like final edit pictures, I guess. So I'll take pictures and I'll put them up on my computer, edit them and everything. And I'm zooming right, like I'm looking for all the stuff that it horrifies you to see, because no one really ever should look at them that close. And I'm like, okay, I need to fix the blend here. I forgot to paint the lips. There's a button over here that I didn't paint. It's so much better to catch those things beforehand. And I absolutely make notes, like because like my computer's over there, and then I'm gonna come over here and paint. And I will remember some of it, but it's like if it was super visible to the naked eye, I'd have seen it in the first place, and I didn't. So I need to make notes. And it'll often be stuff like I typically don't paint the lips of a figure until very close to the end of the process, because if I can, for a female character, if I can, I will kind of try to make them fit in a little bit with the clothing or some other element that I've already painted, so I don't necessarily want to choose the color until the end. So I will forget to paint lips all the time. All right, I think that might be calling it done on the tentacles. Where are we time-wise? So I do still have to figure out these like mini tentacles and whatever this is. And then I guess like the question would be, is this organic or is it like a fashion accessory? And I feel inclined to treat it like a fashion accessory. But these are definitely organic, and this is definitely organic, and I feel like I just want to do the same thing with both of those. And actually, remember how I said that I felt like now that I'd integrated the pink and purple into the tentacles, that maybe some green needed to get integrated into up there. And I think that is true. So while I have these green mixes, I'm going to see if I can do a little bit of that. And I very often do this while painting, because I don't always make up my color schemes in advance the way I should. So I'll be like, okay, I added this color. I can take a bit of it and glaze it in, or add touches of it over here to this thing that I already painted, and that'll help make it look like it's all kind of in the same lighting and whatnot. Same color cast of light. So yes, how am I going to do that here? I think we'll start with this darker green and then thin it down more than I did. So let me get some water. So yes, you now have proof that the save paint for a week boast is 100% true. I saved the paint for a week. And honestly, I could keep it longer if I felt I needed to. I rarely do keep it longer than that. But well, sometimes I'll keep it, but I've rarely had to use it. It's like an emergency backup system in case I screw something up. All right, more cough drops, sorry. And possibly I need just a little bit of a pink or purple. in that green just to tone it down and blend it with the other colors a little bit better. And yet, even though I did add a little bit, it still seems super green when I put it in there. That does seem way, way, way too aggressively green. So, so I will put my palette back in the frame for a minute. So this is the color I'm trying to use, and there are a lot of pinks that are like that, or even lighter on there. Red and green are complements. This is already pretty green, even though I tried to tone it down a little. So I imagine what's happening is that because I'm putting it right next to the complement, the pink is making it look even greener. So I probably need something more like this, where there's a lot more of a pink or purple mixed in, but I think I need it darker. I didn't really make a dark version of that. They're not super dark because this is actually a little darker than it started off. I'll put just a little bit of that goggle green there, and then the camera won't focus on it at all. And it's hard to tell because it's wet. But it's, yeah, it's impossible to tell, so never mind. Let me get my piece of paper that works better for that. So this is the goggle green out of the bottle. Which looks darker there than it does to me. I don't know what's happening. And then this is what I had mixed a little of my purple in, and it's made it duller but also a bit darker, because when you start mixing colors, it almost always gets darker. Which is just, you know, handy to know. I messed my thing up again, didn't I? Alright, we'll just be on the palette for a minute, so hopefully it won't be noticeable. It in frame. So I think I want a little bit of goggle green and a little bit of the olive drab, so it's not too dark. And then I'm gonna try with my brunette glow, which I think is on the brain, or is a color that is very close to a color that is on the brain. If I were smart, I would have these in separate areas in case the ratios are way off. Because look at that. Apparently this is a low tinting strength color. And we're going to need a lot more of this pink. And then I think we're going to need a little bit of this pink to make it darker. So now it's not looking particularly green at all. I'll verify on my thingamabobber that, in fact, if you had to describe that, you would describe it probably more as purple or gray than green. But we're going to put it on the brain, and my guess is that it will appear green enough to do the unification thing that I'm talking about. So that's one of those things with color that you just eventually have to figure out. That sometimes, this is why, I mean, I think recipe, see, it does look pretty green here. I'm going to put some on here and hope that I can get it off fast enough that you can see. Now it's too bright. Hold on. All right, so I'm just going to mess them around here. And that looks pretty green, I would say. Like, not, you know, bright green, but it looks like a green. because the green notes are going to come up from the contrast with the pink. No, just he's at the salon. I'll dry his head with the towel. But I don't think I'm going to put a lot of green up there. Maybe I'll put a little bit on the midline. Is that what they call the center of the brain, midline? And even then, it's still looking very green. I'll thin it out some. So anyway, I was saying color recipes. They can be super handy. I absolutely have some. But they're not going to work every time. And stuff like this is why. So you might have a gold NMM recipe that you normally use that has, say, like a warm reddish brown for the shadows. But if you, depending on the color you've painted everything else, it may or may not look good on that particular miniature. So sometimes you have to, hold on, somebody's calling me for some reason. It's not a real person, it's a spam person. Sometimes you have to adjust things a little. Or just understand that's why. That's why things are looking wonky. So like the succubi from Bones 5 have a very different, well, not very different, but a pretty different gold recipe than what I usually use. It is much less saturated because everything on them was pretty desaturated. There was a lot of purple, which brings out yellow. Purple's a complement of yellow, so it's going to be similar to what I'm doing here with the green, where things are looking more green than they actually look on the neutral palette. And if I hadn't done that, the gold would just really, it would really jump out and kind of scream at you, because it would be so rich and red and yellow compared to what was going on with the figures. So while I do have a gold NMM recipe I use, and I have it to the point where I mixed up bottles of like the in-between mixes so I wouldn't have to bother mixing them. When I painted, to save a little time, I don't always use it. Because sometimes it's just not going to be the right answer. I feel like I talked about that recently in a post, but I can't remember now. There is a post up right now. I'm not going to show you. I showed the pictures last week of the Christmas 12 Days of Reaper holiday figures that I had the opportunity to paint, which sadly does not include any of this year's awesome new additions. So if you're not sure which 12 days you might want, if you go to the website up there, you can you'll see bigger pictures and another angle from what Ron can include in the graphic, and that might help you make some decisions. I know I want to get the awesome cat and the Christmas cookies, because I really did have a cat in the Christmas cookies situation, so I need to paint that like my cat Archer. Because this is like, this was a party even, so it was like an epic situation that other people were witness to and tell the story. If I could figure out how to, like, I barely figured out how to do reference pictures, but I have a little video that a friend of mine took, not of the cookie incident, sadly. Sadly, there is no record of the cookie incident. But he came in when Archer was a little, having an annoyed moment, and he videoed it. And then it goes into slow motion as Archer's reaching out to grab him. And it's like he jumped back, as a sensible person should when that much anger is coming right at you. So it's like this whole wildlife documentary moment with my super cranky cat. But it is hilarious. I don't know why we can't do that with people as much. Just appreciate them for who they are. Because we just appreciated the insanity of Archer for who he was. We didn't ask him to go changing. He had his reasons, even if he couldn't explain them to us. I'm pretty sure his reasons were that his stomach hurt all the time, but alas. So, how purple does this look if I paint it right on there? It's pretty good, but I want something darker. That is an area I think I would... Well, wait, what about that one I just mixed? What about that color I just mixed? Which is probably too watery, but we can mix more. For base coating. Yeah, that looks like kind of half pink, half green. That seems like what I want for this in-between area. Because also what I want is easy. It's nice when you can make the little remaining parts not a chore. Because then there's, I guess this is probably supposed to be an eyeball. Or a giant gem, like thing. Either one might be interesting for me to, I don't think I've painted, I've painted eyes. Have I painted eyes? I often do them not on stream because they are small and I have to hold the miniature in various contorted ways. But also because I know my camera resolution wouldn't be showing you what I'm actually doing anyway on, a gaming scale human eyes. But this is very much not a gaming scale eye. In fact, so much so it's going to require extra details. And also there's just one, so you don't have the challenging element of making, how do you make the two eyes look like they're looking in the same direction. So it may or may not be a good example of that. Of eyes, I mean. It would be a good example of a gem. So I don't know, if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to let me know in the chat or later in a private message. If you are one of our lurkers who we love our lurkers. You are welcome to communicate with me in a less public fashion. If you have a request for how I would paint this or anything else you might like me to paint. I think I have some holiday ideas or holiday-ish ideas for the next week or two. I guess if I wanted to get a cat in the cookies, I'd better order soon, or I'm not going to get one in time for next week's stream. But I don't think that's what I will do. I think I have something else in mind. So I'll get one of those, but probably not painted on stream. Tabby stripes are kind of a fiddly thing, and I suspect that it will be too small for you to actually see what I'm doing with tabby stripes. So I don't think it would make a good stream figure. And I have painted a number of little, even familiar sized critters with tabby stripes. And then some Darksword has anthropomorphic. They have a whole anthropomorphic line, and they've got two versions of Archer, and in the newest one, he's like Old Man Archer, and he has Corbin as his assistant. So it's like a little baby Corbin that sort of never existed, because I think Corbin was probably about 9 months when we got him. They said he was full grown, but I look back at the pictures now, and it's like, well, that's not a kitten, but that's also not a full grown cat. But there's also warrior with sword, I think he's called, Corbin, and then original Archer, who was a warlock. Well, he's a warlock in the other one too, but he wasn't actually summoning at the time of the first one. And then Ella as a thief. And all of those are tabby cats. So I've painted tabby stripes at a variety of scales. And then I had one diorama where I wanted to distinguish the two cats. There was a cat on the inside of the scene and a cat on the outside. So I painted the cat on the inside. Interestingly, even though this was years before we had Corbin, I painted him as an orange tabby cat. And that was Julie's cat licking himself, basically. If you've never seen Edna the Cat Lady, go look for that on Reaper right now. Because there are some very awesome poses of cats. And that one is from that. But I wanted the cat on the other side to look a little bit different. So I painted that one. Like our tabby cats are all the, oh crap, I'm forgetting what they call it now. But the stripy kind of one. There's some that it's a bigger pattern. Like it's not spots exactly, but I don't know, clumps. I forget what they call it. I have to make it in between thingy here. Mackerel? No, I feel like the stripes are the mackerel tabby. Maybe that one is just the classic tabby, and then they call the stripe one mackerel. I did look this up at the time. I did study up on tabby cats while deciding what to paint these various critters for this little diorama that I cannot show on here. It's not a Twitch acceptable diorama. It has naked human parts. I mean, the cats are technically naked too, but Twitch seems to be okay with that. And Quindy has very kindly provided a link to Edna and her awesome array of cats. Which, if you like having little filigree eyes to put on bases, you have to get Edna even if you don't want to paint Edna, because so many awesome cats. But when I was working on the diagram, I'm like, should I use that one? And I'm like, yeah, I think I should. Cats totally do that all the time. Especially when you don't want them to, you know. Got some friends over, new people you don't know, your mother-in-law. Cat gonna lick himself. And come right in the middle of the living room and share that moment. It's like, well, thank you, cat. Thank you so much. I am painting over wet paint, which, you know, I shouldn't be doing, but here we are. Because I'm not really trying to wet blend, I'm just trying to get this done up quickly so that you guys don't have to look at them again until we figure out how to paint that area. We do non-metallic metal and something there. Maybe the whole thing's just a fashion choice. It's not an eyeball. I need a little more darkness. Because there's a neat texture there. I mean, that's not an actual brain structure, is it? I don't know. I did look at a reference picture of a brain to paint this. I think I even showed you guys very briefly on stream because I didn't want to upset people who don't like seeing medical type stuff. But it was just it's just this angle of a brain. They didn't flip it over and show me what the other side looked like. I have to imagine somewhere out there there's a picture of that on the net, but it seems like one of those questions that maybe I should not ask. I did, and this was years ago. This was way before there were so many pictures online as there are now. I was trying to paint a bird And I think I was wrestling with what kind of bird to paint it. Or maybe I had decided, but, I wanted examples of the wings. And I found this site on a university that they had all these dead wings. I know it sounds terrible, but, that's how they do science. They have samples of things to study. And they had taken pictures of both sides, so it was actually super helpful. Because most birds, the wings are very different from the top and from the bottom. So they're usually lighter on the bottom, so that if there's a bird predator looking up at them, it looks more like sky and they blend in. And then they're darker from the top, so if the predator is looking down, it looks closer to the value of the things on the ground. And they blend in more. And I think that site is still around. I think I managed to find it again. Birds are probably my least favorite thing to paint in miniature. That just feathers in general seem like one of those things. It's just hard to paint them in a way that comes out looking good, and also it's a lot of work. And I'm sure Julie, if she can hear me, is laughing because she's like, "Oh, you think it's work to paint those things? It's a little bit of work to sculpt them." Which I can well imagine that it is. I don't know if those parts are pinky enough. I might have to come in with a really good pink later when everything actually is dry, and glaze in more pink. I got a little too desaturated. Although, maybe it's good that they kind of fit in with the tentacles more, but I sort of want them to be a bridge between the tentacles and the brain part. Color bridge. Fun fact, the parasite T. gondii makes wolves more likely to become pack leaders. Huh. That's very interesting. I fear how much we're going to learn about the influence that bacteria and so on are having on our lives. People worry about, self-determination and God, but I'm not sure if we should be worried about self-determination and bacteria. Alright, do those need more highlighting? Because that's his face part. I think they need more highlighting because I probably will do that glazing thing that I talked about. I don't know. I'll have to maybe do some tests. I'm not sure how well glazing works out, like how much you can see it on video. I find that it's sometimes hard to capture in photographs, like if I do a sort of before and after. When I used to do a glazing class, and this is part of the reason I don't do them very often, I would paint the entire miniature and then glaze parts, and so have part glazed and part not glazed of the same kind of thing, and pass it around, and people could see the effect that the glazing had. But while it can be profound in some ways, it can be hard for like cameras and stuff to pick up enough for someone to see it just in a photograph. Or probably on video would be my guess, is that it also does not. So there we have our very seasonal red and green brain monster, also known as a hive warden to people who are able to do web searches and have memories better than I do. Curse 13. The goal, of course, is to get wolves to more aggressively enter cougar territory to create higher chances for T. gondii to return to its preferred feline host. Yeah, science fiction and fantasy have nothing on what actually happens in the world. So thank you for sticking it out with me, painting this guy for what may have seemed like forever. I don't know if it seemed like forever to you, but it seemed like a minute to me. I am thinking that I might do another show where I work on expanding integral bases or doing. I feel like this base is a little insufficient to his magnificent monster he needs, and he needs a little bit bigger of a base. Hey, I'll be Zane. I'm just finishing up, actually, I think. Yep, I'm right about on time. I'm trying to... Did I have something to show you? I feel like I did, but now I'm not seeing anything other than, go get your Cathy's. I saw they were still on the site. Cathy Wapple Tribute Miniature. Help Jim and Cathy out. And I still saw the Ukrainian bird up on Reaper when I checked this morning. So if you're looking for something to buy to make your order large enough to get a 12 days miniature, that would be a thing. And then, luckily it's bones. So when I throw it around like that, it's fine. And I will just show my palette again. So you can see the paint that lasted a week. And it's actually dried up more during this session than it had during that week with the sponges on top of it. This pool is very low. I mean, I used that color too, but that pool is very low. If I'd been working on certain structures of things, I will try to do like the shadow, like be working on the shadows of everything and have a sponge over the highlights that I've mixed, and then do vice versa if I'm working on dark areas, so that I reduce the evaporation as much as possible during the painting process as well. But that's not how we painted tentacles, so I didn't do that. But yes, in case someone wasn't here at the beginning, this is a ceramic palette. If you wanted to look for one on Amazon, look for 28 well palette. It's the same kind that Anne uses. Spot plates, and that specific term, spot plates, it's like smaller ones that just have, it doesn't have this part, and it's going to be like 9 or 12 of the little things. They may be a little shallower. Those are like a scientific instrument, but it's basically the same concept and probably the same material. It comes in plastic too. I would recommend ceramic if you can get it, because it cleans up easier, but plastic may be cheaper. But I like these types of palettes when I want to control the dilution, the consistency of my paint very precisely. And also when I want to preserve it, which seems counterintuitive. I know everybody's like, what? The point of wet palettes is to preserve paint. The wet palette would have been possibly more effective. If you remember the first time I started painting the tentacles, a lot of my paint had dried out by the end of the stream. So I like them during a session, and I do use wet palettes a lot. But if I need to use paint over multiple sessions, or I want to be able to keep it for any length of time, I do this. And then I get, like, these are just kitchen sponges. These particular ones look jagged because they had like waves that I had to cut off so that they would go edge to edge. And I get that like pretty much so they're like soaking. These are a little dry because I added the water to them last night. But I should be able to like just squeeze them lightly and water starts coming out. And I put them on top. And I try to check the water, check that they're moist once a day. Wet, not moist. Wet. And then every few days, I only did it once. I did it on Friday. So I mixed up all this paint and used it on stream last week. I maintained my sponges every 36 hours or so. I checked on the amount of moisture that was in there, made sure they were at least wet, if not dripping wet. And then on Friday, I went through all the paint and stirred it, because it will start to set, like you can see it's happening on this paint already, because some colors just separate more than others. But it's like you can see some of the medium, and it's like pink in the middle, and then it's lighter green around the edges. If it wasn't so shiny, you could see that. But it's hard to not make things look shiny and that there's still enough light to see them. So they'll separate, so it's good to stir them from that, but you're also checking to see whether you need to add a little bit extra water, which there were some on the edge, and then the ones that have a lot of white, I have to add water to usually. And I kept this paint for a week. You can go back and watch the video and verify that all the weird little dots are, well, that dot isn't in the same, no, that dot is. That dot isn't in the same place because I made that paint today. That I'm not flim-flamming you that this really does work for a week. So I've described the secrets of the reverse wet palette before, but I've never actually been able to demonstrate them to anyone. So you're the first people who got to see it in action. But I am going to let Quindy find us a raid now so that we can keep on having nerdy fun. And I'll see you all next week. I'll try to do something seasonal, although I don't think I'm going to go too, traditional holidays this year, but we'll see. We'll see what I decide to do. I have 2 ideas, one for this week, one for the upcoming week, and then one for that, one after that. Or am I thinking of the same week? Either way, I'll be doing some things. And I hope that you will join me. You're going to go raid Monument Slow Fuse and share the Reaper love. I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.